morning, everybody. I'm amazed at the fact that we are in advance, never seen in Paris, but I'm really happy to start like that. My name is Aurélie Catalot. I am the director of the Agricultural and Food French program at IDDRI, the Institute for Sustainable Development and International Relations based in Paris, and I will have the pleasure to facilitate today's event. Today is a great moment for us as it marks the completion of a 5-year project on the livestock sector, carried out in the framework of the Horizon Europe project Pathways, funded jointly by IDDRI and IDDRI. The Pathways project, run by the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences and the Reading University in the UK, gathers 30 partners active in 12 countries. It aims at identifying policy and business levers to support the transition towards more sustainable livestock sectors across the European Union. The topic is particularly relevant given the centrality of livestock in the organization of our food system, but also given the multiple dimensions of sustainability it relates to, and finally, also given the fact that we have to face a great social and political sensitivity of the topic that has become a very hard one to debate and discuss constructively. Against its backdrop, the originality of the Pathways project is twofold. On the one hand, it looks at all dimensions of sustainability with the objective of identifying trade-offs and synergies between them. On the other hand, it rests upon a strong level of engagement with all stakeholders of EU livestock sectors across countries, across species, and across the different types of value chain actors. In what follows, my colleague Pierre-Marie Aubert, who I guess all of you know here, will zoom in on the French meat sectors, and more precisely in the poultry, pork, and beef sector, looking at both the drivers of their recent transformations and at what could happen to them in the next 10 years. This French perspective will mainly serve to illustrate questions and challenges we need to address while thinking about the future of the EU livestock sector. This comes at a particularly timely moment, since IDDRI has been preparing over the last few months a livestock strategy that aims at guiding future EU policy actions for the livestock sector. In that context, our conference can be seen as an input to the very numerous ongoing conversations seeking to feed in this livestock strategy. Before giving Pierre-Marie the floor, let me thank all the colleagues, all the partners who have made this project and also this conference possible. And I'll start with Laurence Smith here, the coordinator of the Pathways project. I would like also to thank the Revolve team who has organized basically everything for this conference today. I would like also to thank our great agri-food team at IDDRI, as well as other French partner think tanks. Thank you also to the 3 French technical institutes, which are partner of the Pathways project, with which we collaborated tightly to develop the scenarios, and from which we learned a lot. And finally, I would like also to thank the 3 French meat interbranch organizations, Envol, Inapport, and Interbev, which we have exchanged closely over the last 4 years now, and without which the scenario exercise we are going to present would have been very different and most probably slightly less accurate than it is actually. Just a last word regarding the program for today. After Pierre-Marie's presentation, we will unfortunately not have the time for a Q&A session. But if you have any remarks, I highly encourage you to go and jump on Pierre-Marie during the lunch break. I'm sure he will be keen on answering all your questions. So after his presentation, we will directly move over to 2 moderated panels. The first one with Gijs Schildhuis, hope it was fine, Isabelle Cajatus, Céline Preder. And then the second panel with Birte Steenberg, Ziv Noga, Inez Ajuda. Each of the 2 panels will be followed by a few questions from the audience, although we will have to keep it quite short, and I'm sorry for that. Then finally, Laurence will conclude the conference, and in the end, you will be offered a very well-deserved light lunch. That being said, I think, Pierre-Marie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, dear everyone. I'm super happy to be here. Just to say that the conference is also live streamed, so we have a couple of colleagues watching us online. So hi everyone online. So what I'm going to talk about, Aurélie has already said a few words about that. To be more precise, does it work? No, it's not working anymore. Yeah. The key question, given the time we are in, is how can we design or co-design a livestock strategy? I think this people at IDDRI are asking themselves the question probably every day, my colleague at E3 or in B. There are too many people in the room, so the pointer doesn't work very well. I'm going to make it work. No. Yeah, thanks. So, I mean, the way in which we've been thinking about this, the question of co-designing a strategy is that, okay, what is the vision we have for our food systems with an S? We have several types of food systems, of several types of livestock systems in the EU. And given that vision or those visions, what kind of policy instruments do we want to deploy, to design and deploy to get to there? The key point being that you're not gonna agree on a given instrument if there is no political or social deal underpinning this vision and the instruments to get there. So the whole question is, how do we go through those three building blocks in such a way that at the end of the day we find some compromises between the different stakeholders in the room. So the idea is that in what I'm going to present, we want to build a series of visions for the EU livestock sectors, and as said by Aurélie, focusing here on France as an illustration. And the point is that we want this to be based on a robust enough modeling so that we have a common understanding of what are or what could be the outcomes, the risks, and the feasibility of different options for the livestock sector. And then we can identify opportunities to be seized, potential losses, and think about how we mitigate the losses, how we seize the opportunities. That is the whole spirit of the exercise we carried out over the last couple of years. So what I'm going to talk about, what I'm going to cover, I'm going to start with the framework through which we've looked at the livestock sector over those few years and show the diversity of our livestock sector and show also that its evolution has been driven by a central process which is called commodification. I'll come back on that in a minute. I'll show then that the business as usual scenario, so what happens if nothing different is done than today, raises a number of questions from a social, economic, and environmental point of view. I'll then dive into the three alternative scenarios that we've developed in France based on the pathways storyline that I'm going to present. They are all politically challenging and not exposed to the same risks. So let's look at that. And this will help me, to basically set the scene for the panels that will come after, pointing out to three areas where there might be, or there could be a value added in developing EU policies regarding spatial planning, demand-side measures, and international trade. So, what is the situation and how can we understand it? What's the framework through which we can think about it? Well, what we've been doing is that we took a food system perspective to think about all that. So putting the livestock sector at the center, and of course taking into account its diversity. There are ruminants, there are monogastrics, there are grass-fed systems, there are concentrate-fed systems, etc. So we took that diversity into account, and we looked at, okay, how much is produced, how much is processed to get to the plate of humans. But of course, livestock and animal husbandry systems will never exist without feed plant production, which is basically determined by the land use, the yields of each of the production. And then there is a question which is, how do we allocate our biomass between animal feed, human food, and non-food uses? That's always the key question. So how you raise animal has to do with how you feed humans and how you use the biomass for other uses. All this is also underpinned by the fact that to grow biomass, you need nutrients. And first and foremost, nitrogen. And where does that nitrogen come from is a key issue. And where does that nitrogen go after having been excreted by animals is also a key question. So besides those physical fluxes that we have modeled, we had other parameters that we put into our model regarding volumes, intensity, and geography of the production, regarding farm structures, and regarding industry dynamics and industry structures, and what we call the product mix, meaning how is a carcass of pig or beef or whatever transformed? Is it transformed into steak? How do you say steak haché? Anyway, and then we had a few sustainability issues that we were able to assess quantitatively. On the socioeconomic side, jobs, number of farms, stranded assets, trade balance, and on the environmental side, GHG emissions, land use, and particularly the distinction between grasslands and croplands, and nutrient balances. So all those indicators were quantified using different models, not optimization models. It's like a spatial planner, like a central planner exercise. So we are deciding everything, and the model is just there to help us to make sure that we are not violating any rules of the physics, any rules of labor intensity or whatever. So with that in mind, what has happened over the last decades to the EU livestock sectors, again with an S? What I'd like to put at the core of the conversation is the fact that the meat sector in particular, but the dairy sector as well, has experienced a process of commodification. What do we mean by this? We mean the fact that raw product, meat or dairy product, have become standard, more and more standardized, and exchanged on markets that are more and more opened, based first and foremost on production costs. This has several consequences. The first of it is that the animal source foods that are the most efficient to produce or the most cost effective to produce are the ones that are preferred by the consumers, as can be seen with that graph where you see that poultry and milk, which are the most commodified animal products, are the ones that are experiencing the most growth in terms of consumption. You can see it, another consequence of that, not directly of communication, but of that, is that we are also consuming slightly more animal proteins than when we would need. This is for France. The animal proteins are in gray. This is the observed situation. You see that to fulfill all our needs, we could eat 2 to 3 times less animal proteins while still having enough micro and macronutrients to be live a healthy life. But another key aspect is that this commodification process incentivizes all actors to be more cost effective. And one way to be more cost effective, as seen here, is to increase your fixed asset, your fixed capital, to automatize, to simplify, to reduce labor costs, etc. And you see here, for example, for Denmark, that it has led to a 2-fold or even 3-fold increase in the fixed asset. And that, of course, there are also big differences between countries where France is there and Denmark is there. You have 10-fold difference between the fixed assets immobilized for meat production. Another key dimension of the commodification process is that this search for reduced production cost has led to specialization. So the greener the area, the higher the livestock density. And why is high livestock density interesting from a production cost perspective? It's because it enables to reduce transport cost, to achieve scale economies at the slaughterhouse, at the dairy level, etc. And so what has happened is that over years, livestock has gradually concentrated in a few areas where its production is the most cost effective. And with that, some countries lose and some country wins. So here you see Poland benefiting from that, not yet at the same level of livestock density in other countries, so still probably going to increase a lot in Poland, Germany, and then you see countries that are not winning too much, France and Denmark. This is for poultry, but we could have shown the same graph for pigs or for beef, and we would have seen Spain being at the top, etc., etc. Behind that, as I said, this commodification process, this spatial specialization has led to a very specific way of managing the nutrients. So we need 12 million tons of fertilizers to grow crop, most of them being fed to animals. We import 3 million tons of nitrogen and other form of feed, and the bulk of it is lost to the environment because basically we are not able to valorize all the manure that comes from the animals, and meaning that basically we lose nearly 60% of all the nutrients we mobilize to get our food system to function. 60%, that's not really efficient. So how do we deal with that? How do we do better? That's a key question. And that has led us, as a bloc, as a political bloc, to become a net dependence bloc in terms of protein. So we depend for 20 to 25% of the import market for the protein we consume. But this translates also in terms of caloric dependency. So 10 to 15% of the calorie we consume, so 5 to 10%, are basically imported net of export. So we have become a net importing bloc. So where would this lead if everything would continue without major redirections, major changes? We're going to look now at the French situation and discuss what a business as usual scenario could look like for France. So first of all, the French sector, the French meat sectors with an S, has experienced over the last couple of years, since 2000 basically, a slight decline in competitiveness for many reasons that we could discuss later. But basically it has moved from being the first poultry exporter in the world back in the mid-90s to become a net importer of meat by 2015, so to speak, while the demand has, since 2010, remained quite stable. So what we can anticipate is a growing gap between the supply and the demand. So supply continuing to go down because we have no easy way to catch up on competitiveness, while we don't assume strong ways in which the demand will be redirected, meaning a growing demand-supply gap. And with that, so you see here increase in demand for the different meats, so poultry, pig and beef. Reduced production, as I said, except for poultry, where the increase will be much lower than the increase in consumption, and which would lead to reduced exports, increased import, and a trade balance that deteriorates, as I said. And with that, there are several socioeconomic consequences. Less jobs in the industry, less jobs at the farm level, which also has to do with increase in efficiency, etc., but also environmental consequences. On the positive side, you can say, well, we would need less feed, we would need less concentrate to feed our animals. But the backside of the coin is also that we would probably lose a lot of grasslands because basically this process will continue to concentrate animals in the western part of France, losing our grasslands in the center of France. While at the same time, we would import more greenhouse gases under the form of meat, even though our direct emissions might reduce, and the nitrogen surpluses would not be reduced because basically animals will remain in the western part of France, and so there is no way in which this can enable to reduce our surplus. So that raises many questions. Nobody is happy with that. A year and a half ago, when we invited the French interbranch organizations to a conference like this one, they all said, we don't want this. We don't want this scenario to happen because this is bad for us, it's bad for the environment, it's bad for everyone. So what else? The key question is that it's not a question only for France. It's of course more a question for France now than for other countries because of the fact that we basically have lost on competitiveness over the last few years. But what we can assume is that other territories in Europe, the ones that are less concentrated, less competitive now, are likely to be affected in the same way and then lose their capacity to produce because they are not enough competitive, degrade marginal lands or less exploit the marginal lands, while livestock in certain areas where it's still competitive could continue to increase in numbers, as you can see on the map. So basically, more red areas in the future and less orange one, which are mixed crop livestock systems. So what to do? We've been exploring 3 alternative scenarios for the French livestock sector, and we believe there are some lessons to be drawn for the EU level. What are the scenarios? We borrowed the 3 storylines that were developed in the Pathways project in a collaborative manner with many stakeholders, many researchers from Europe. And those storylines really focus on the supply side. So they describe the livestock sector without the demand. The first storyline is efficiency first. It's about increasing feed conversion efficiency as a lever to basically transform livestock sectors by improving both the competitiveness and the environmental efficiency, so the per kilogram efficiency of the production. In that context, meat is likely to remain a commodity. We are looking for improved efficiency, improved competitiveness. The feed no food scenario is a storyline or scenario where we try to avoid as much as possible feed food competition, while at the same time there is an attempt to valorize agrobiodiversity, so meaning more diverse cropping systems, more integration between crop and livestock systems, etc. That probably requires some sort of decommodification, because doing so, at least under the current market conditions, you are less effective in terms of production cost. The last storyline we worked on is rural renaissance, which was pretty much favored by many stakeholders, which is about making sure or putting livestock sector at the center of rural communities to use them as a lever to revitalize rural communities from a social and economic point of view. So having livestock production as a cornerstone of rural life in all possible areas, so where it makes sense, basically. The way in which we have modeled this scenario in France is what we can call a sort of dualization. So we keep livestock systems where, basically, for example, in the center of France, in the Massif Central, so we keep extensive systems, we valorize, we make the assumptions that those systems can valorize very nice products on a non-price competitiveness basis. But at the same time, because the livestock sector in the western part of France is so important economically speaking, it is kept there as well, and the commodity production continues. So we have both price competitiveness and non-price competitiveness that are combined on the same territory. As a reminder, in Pathways, we had a fourth storyline, which was about high animal welfare. In the conversation we had with French stakeholders, we collectively decided, well, that maybe not the most important scenario to put in the French debate. I know people in that room might say, no, that's the most important one. Forgive us. It was already quite challenging to develop the three first one. We are super happy to discuss the fourth one during the panels and during the questions afterwards. So as I said, the three storylines focus on the supply side. What we did is that we combined them with three demand side scenarios by 2035. So we are still 10 years down the line, 9 years now. So the business as usual demand scenario, where you have a decrease in beef consumption, a slight decrease in pork consumption, and an increase in poultry production, so which means a slight increase in meat, overall meat consumption. We did develop at IDDRI another scenario for French households based on a quite granular characterization of French households, where we were able to assume slight changes, so a near stabilization of poultry consumption, which is pretty complicated to think about, but we tried to, with the different measures, a stronger reduction in pork consumption and a similar reduction in beef consumption. And then we also used a last demand scenario, which we borrowed from the agroecological scenario, more or less the feed no food storyline, we developed with Xavier Poux and our colleagues at IDDRI and ASCA back in 2018, where you can see that reduction in total meat consumption is higher and is focused more on the monogastric than on the ruminants because of the specific role ruminants play in minimizing feed food competition, right? So I'm not going to go through all the details of the modeling. We can discuss that, the publication is online, but just a few hints there. First of all, total production in the different scenarios, you see it goes down for the business as usual scenario in red, rural renaissance and feed no food. The only scenario where production goes slightly up is the efficiency first scenario because of efficiency gains and because the assumption which is behind that, efficiency gains are highly compatible with competitiveness gain, right? So we can regain some market share on the domestic market, on the export market maybe. This has different meaning or for the different production. So for beef, pig, and poultry, and you see that efficiency first is mostly about monogastric production, pig and poultry production, less about beef production, even though it's still the scenario that performs the best in terms of total production. Here again, believe me, we regionalized total production by those three big regions in France that make sense from an agronomic point of view. So the western part of France Here is what we call the field crop area, where basically as of now, it's mostly arable crops. And here is mountainous areas with suckler cows and dairy cows, especially in the eastern part. And what we did is that we allocated, as I said, as in the central planner perspective, the different animals in those different regions and calculated nitrogen surpluses that go with it at the regional level, because nitrogen surpluses at the national level does not really make sense. It needs to be more regionalized, even though it's not very granular here. So what we can say is that self-sufficient levels for each of the supply-demand combination are different, of course. And you see that if the demand stays similar as today, then the only scenario that enables to maintain the same level of self-sufficiency is efficiency first. And in all combinations, efficiency first, because it's the one that produces the most, is the scenario that enable to be the most self-sufficient, reaching over 140% of self-sufficiency, which is basically back to what we had in the mid-90s, basically. And you can see that Feed No Food, for example, can only feed French people under the assumption of a TIFA demand, where total consumption would decrease by 25% overall for meat. So, which raises a lot of questions that I'm going to touch upon in a minute. Last thing before I go to a more overarching analysis is the climate impacts of the different combination of supply and demand. So in this table, what you're going to see is GHG emissions, including imported emission, where 2020 is 100. And the red cells indicate a supply-demand configuration that does not meet the French climate targets by 2035, while the green ones indicate a configuration that does meet the target. So what we see here is that with a business as usual demand scenario, none of the supply scenario enable to meet our climate targets, as a fact. Under a TRAM demands, so the scenario for household consumption patterns, efficiency first and Feed No Food can enable to reach our climate targets. And of course, where the demand goes further in terms of reduction, it gives more margin of maneuver to meet the climate targets, because there is no need to import any emissions under the form of meat products. So now, looking at the trade-offs and synergies that I mentioned, because this is what we are looking for. So here you see the 2020 situation. And we've looked on that bar graph. We have many more indicators, but we focused on meat production, GHG emission, including imported emission, assuming here a business as usual demand, nitrogen surplus, use of cropland, use of permanent grasslands, number of livestock farms, number of on-farm jobs, and number of jobs at the industry level. There are other indicators we could discuss, but. So the business as usual scenario is one in which everything is less good, if I may. We have lower level of permanent grasslands. We use less cropland, which is maybe good. We have lower nitrogen surplus, but at the regional level in the western part of France, the nitrogen surplus is still the same as of today. So at the national level, it's lower. We have lower production, lower number of jobs, etc., etc. Against that backdrop, the efficiency first scenario, as we said, manages to maintain the total level of production, reduce slightly more greenhouse gas emission because of efficiency gains. Our feed conversion efficiency is better. We reduce the emission per kilogram of meat. Nitrogen surplus is similar because we have the same production. We have higher production but better efficiency. Still in the western part of France, we have a bit of a trouble. We don't use more cropland because we are more efficient, but we do use even less grasslands. So we have even more land abandonment in the, let's say, marginal areas of France. We have less farms, less jobs at the farm level because of the consolidation process that is continuing and even accelerating. And we have a similar number of jobs at the industry level than in the business as usual, because we assume that industries will become more efficient, more productive. So even though we have higher volumes, it does not translate into a higher number of jobs, simply because you need less people to process the meat. The Feed No Food scenario now, is a scenario that has a main feature enable to valorize all grasslands and do not lose any grasslands. And we have even assumed a slight increase in permanent grasslands in the green area of my map, the arable crop area, because we want to have some animals back in those areas for the sake of nutrient recycling. We reduce significantly nitrogen surpluses because of the fact that we deconcentrate livestock systems from the high density areas. Lower GHG emissions, much lower meat production, which is one of the key challenges as well. And we assume that at the industry level, there would be a more like better valorization of the product, so higher labor intensity of the production, because we have better quality product, so to speak. And on-farm jobs and livestock farms, they do not reduce at the same rate because we assume more complex systems, and we modeled all the farms, and I'm not showing it here, so higher labor intensity, which raises a lot of questions regarding competitiveness and capacity to thrive on the market, of course. And then the rural renaissance scenario seems very close to the business as usual, but only because we are looking here only at aggregated indicators. In reality, it's quite different because it assumes this dualization that I mentioned earlier. So GHG emission remains similar, but with very different systems, highly efficient on the one hand, and less, let's say, efficient on the other hand, etc. So N surpluses remain the same. And where it makes a difference is on the social dimension, because basically we keep livestock systems wherever it's possible, wherever it makes sense from a social point of view. And there are many areas where it makes sense to keep livestock systems. So we have more jobs on farms, more farms, and more jobs in the industry level. So we can combine all of them, and we see that they do not deliver the same outcomes. But what is interesting is that so each has its own strengths and weaknesses, and depending where you're looking at from, you might prefer one or the other one. I'm not saying which one I prefer, probably you know. What is interesting is that none of those scenarios, as I said already, could meet or can meet the French climate objectives without changes in the demand. And all of them are quite challenging politically. If you bring that to the French Ministry of Agriculture and say, which one do you prefer? He will probably say, none of them. I don't see how I'm going to do that. Why? Because the efficiency first scenario will require quite some important investments with probably some public money to de-risk private investment. We don't have this money at the moment. It needs social deal to support livestock intensification and concentration that we not necessarily have at the moment in France. Feed no food requires significant dietary shifts that nobody is ready to, support, and probably some quite important evolution in the market conditions, because if we produce at higher production cost, who's going to buy that? If our neighbors are able to produce at lower cost and import it on our market. The rural renaissance might seem the most appealing scenario, but in reality, it also looks like pretty much what happened in France over the last 30-40 years. Basically a segmentation of the market, which prevents from competitiveness gains in any of the segments, and basically leads to where we are now in France. So it might seem very appealing, but it's also very risky. And those scenarios are also exposed to risks, but those risks are of a different nature. In efficiency first, we want to mitigate market risks by becoming more competitive through efficiency gains, but we do not reduce structural dependency that I mentioned earlier in terms of nitrogen, in terms of feed import. We still have negative externalities from an environmental point of view and job losses because we are to be more competitive on the market. Feed no food will reduce structural dependencies. We would rely less on fertilizer or feed import, but what about market dynamics, as I said already? And rural renaissance probably will maintain the same structural dependencies, but as I said, less potential to catch up on competitiveness than efficiency first. So probably a risky avenue. So to conclude, I will probably go slightly over my 30 minutes, forgive me for that. There are three interrelated policy areas that we believe could be discussed, and we hope will be discussed in the next couple of minutes. First is the question of spatial planning. It's been a lot about that in my presentation. We know about these differences in livestock density and all the different things that come with it. Can you just click on the... Huh. Okay, I know what I have to say. Anyways, so the question is not to have a kind of very rigid spatial planning, but rather, can we raise the question of like, okay, who produces what and where and for what purposes? And we know, as I said at the very beginning, livestock concentration in specific areas has very, very good economic reasons. So if we do want to do differently, because we have seen with efficiency first that efficiency gains are not enough to address the environmental problems that come with livestock concentration, if we do want to do differently, how do we work with market dynamics? And here comes the two other avenues that I wanted to show. I show you. One is about the demand side options, and the other one is about the global trade questions. On the demand side, there are two issues. One is about the quality. How do we make sure that what the EU is good at producing is valued by the consumers? It seems to be obvious, but it might not in the future, where Thailand and Brazil together increases their production every year by the same amount of poultry meat than the EU produces every year. So, at some point, we can wonder whether we are not going to import much more from those two big blocks. Quantitatively speaking, I've said that, we know we have unbalanced diets with slightly too much animal proteins and slightly too less of fruits and veg. Why don't we discuss about the fact that we really need European people to really eat more fruit and veg for health, for many, many other reasons? Now it's locked, sorry. So can we discuss that? It's been a conversation that happened during in the afternoons of the Farm to Fork strategy. Now it's not so much at the agenda anymore. Can we put that back on the agenda and really look at a few options that were already discussed? Public procurement, promotion policies for the EU market, for the quality product. And fiscal measures are in the remit of member states, but is there anything that the EU can do to frame potential fiscal measures to incentivize the consumption of fruit and veg? That's one of the questions. My last point is on global trade. We know, and you probably know about the, what is called, the agri-benchmark that I done by the Tunan Institute. We know that production costs for many of our meat sectors in Europe are higher than the most competitive actors in the world. I've spoken about Brazil or Thailand, etc. So one of the questions that I raised already with my colleagues from IDDRI is, to what extent in the future EU players are able to maintain price competitiveness or become price competitive? Because we discussed that with Birte, EU poultry producers are not that much price competitive. They need tariff barriers to exist. So what is our vision for the future in terms of price competitiveness and perhaps in terms of non-price competitiveness? And with that comes the question of like market openness. We know that tariff barriers and overall tariff rates have gone lower and lower and lower after years, either because of quotas, either because of tariffs going down. Is this something that can continue? And if not, what are the options? Can we have real mirror clauses? Not so sure. We've not managed to get them in place in the last few years. So what kind of deal can we think about with our trade partners to have mirror clauses in place if we think it's a solution? If we don't think it's a solution, what else? With that, I took 3 minutes more than was planned. I'm so sorry. I give over to Aurélie.
Thank you very much, Pierre-Marie. Is it working? Okay, thank you. I invite now Gijs, Isabelle, and Céline to join me here on the panel. I hope you are a little bit frustrated by the fact that we have not been able to ask Pierre-Marie any questions, but hopefully we will tackle some of your questions during this panel. So I'm delighted to have here by my side Gijs from the European Commission. You are the Director for Sustainability at IDDRI. Then we have Céline, who is a policy officer at CEJA, the EU Young Farmers Organization. I'm sure most of you know Seja as well. And finally, Isabel, who is a researcher in the Agri-Food Research and Technology Center of Aragon in Spain. And you're also the vice president of the Animal Task Force, which is a private-public partnership dedicated to promoting a sustainable and competitive livestock in the European Union. Are you fine with those presentations, or is there any words you would like to add? Okay. Okay. So we are going to jump on very quickly on, I would say, one of the core questions that Pierre raised is the fact that we at IDDRI worked mainly, at least in that case, on the French meat sector. But we are here in Brussels, and the question is to which extent there are lessons to be learned from the outcomes of our work at French level for the EU as a whole or for other member states. To which extent does this presentation resonate for the EU? And I think I would like to give you the floor first, Gijs, if you agree, on answering that question.
Thank you very much. So quite a challenge. Thank you very much for the invitation, and Pierre-Marie, thank you for the extensive introduction. So I think it's fair to say that it resonates well, in the sense that it raises a lot of the important questions. And in terms of your question about there was a lot on France, of course, but also at the beginning we saw a lot of graphs and slides on the European situation. And I think it's fair to say that also for the EU as a whole, the analysis that you've done for France is extremely relevant. And I'm actually quite happy that 5 years ago we sort of launched this pathway a project as part of Horizon, I understand as part of the Horizon, because now we have great results at the right time for the livestock strategy that the Commission is preparing in second quarter of this year. A lot of engagement with stakeholders and member states is ongoing to make this strategy not a document from the Commission that drops like that, but that's really built on the basis of a lot of engagement with European stakeholders, and it also underlines the importance that the Commission attaches to the livestock sector. I think that's probably few have want to take away a message from what the Commission thinks about all these things. I think we really fundamentally value a lot and attach a lot of value to the role of the livestock sector in European agriculture, in European countryside, in the European food system. So maybe I don't know how long you want me to speak, but you stop me if I say. So I think one of the interesting observations, or one of the thoughts I had when listening to the presentation, is that if you think about the competitiveness of the French livestock sector compared to those in other member states, we're really talking about the competitiveness of industrial clusters to some extent, right? We are looking at are the Polish poultry producers more efficient or more competitive than those in France or those in some other member states. So in that sense, this is about industrial optimization, cost reductions, knowledge. How can you? We see that also, I think, in a lot of other economic sectors, that sometimes you have places where clusters really reinforce themselves. So, is this a purely agricultural question, or is it more of a industrial optimization question? I think I probably side with the latter, and I would also like to underline that the overall situation for the EU, of course, we are exporter of livestock products, right? So this is really also about the internal competition. The bigger question that I find interesting is really on the trend that we see really in the EU, and which you have shown this morning, is the rapid decline of mixed farms, rapid decline of extensive livestock farms. The smaller farms, of course, are more vulnerable even, and in a way that is where we are trying to respond also with policy. I'm sure that in future questions we come to that, but policy responses in terms of supporting particularly those extensive operations. I don't know, shall I stop here? And I'm happy to come in on
Yeah,
for the
and we
detail.
will
Thank
come
you.
back indeed to the policy question. We will also come back to the question that you raised about the industrial optimization, which I think really much refers to Pierre-Marie's first big question about the spatial distribution of livestock. But first, I would like to also give the floor to Isabelle. Isabelle, as a researcher, I would be very keen on hearing about your, let's say, critical assessment of what Pierre-Marie presented, so the outcomes of our research project at French level. But also, could you tell us about the eventual extent to which this work could inspire other types of researches or other types of studies at EU level?
Yes, thanks. It's on? Okay, sorry. So thanks very much, Celine, and thanks for the invitation. So yes, I think you have identified here very well the trends that we are seeing all over Europe towards concentration and specialization in some areas, and then reduction of livestock numbers and abandonment of land use in some others, mostly marginal areas and grassland-based systems where they produce very important ecosystem services and they contribute to the economy and maintenance of landscapes and rural populations. So the challenges are very well identified. We have also studied this from the Animal Task Force point of view. We have produced a vision paper and a strategic research agenda trying to promote, as you said, a more competitive and sustainable livestock sector in Europe. And what we have done here is we have diagnosed the different pathways through which we could shift livestock farming from being perceived as part of the problem in terms of environment or welfare or health to being acknowledged as part of the solution, because livestock can contribute to mitigating climate change, to food nutrition, sovereignty, and security in Europe. So we have identified these three pathways, which are based, well, I can develop on them later, on efficiency, circularity, and diversity of livestock production systems. And also we have highlighted the very important role of research and science-based evidence to inform the public, to inform all the stakeholders in the chain, and to engage in constructive dialogue between amongst the different partners, so that we can better inform the public. So what I guess could be done in your analysis of these different trends is to put these three pathways as factors also in the equation, because in your business as usual you are not considering that livestock production could somehow incorporate this better efficiency, better circularity, better diversity within the systems, and also the fact that transparent information could be also introduced in the equation and drive both the supply and the demand for quality and quantity of animal source products in Europe.
I'll come back to that issue of diversity, circularity, which are two topics that are also very dear to IDDRI's work on livestock. But to finish the first round, Céline, with you I would like to move slightly towards the issue of policies. Usually, we all agree on the fact that if we were able to combine competitiveness and sustainability for the livestock sector, of course, that would be perfect. But concretely, since this is the objective of the future livestock strategy of the European Commission, for CIJA, what does trying to combine competitiveness and sustainability mean in terms of trade, in terms of imports, regarding our strategic dependencies, and in terms of exports? Is there a way for us to combine those two objectives while having to deal with those trade issues?
So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. So it is a quite tricky question, of course. I think what is for us as CIJA, what we want to highlight first is why is there this trend of concentration in certain areas and a decline in mixed farms or livestock farms in other areas. It is because generation renewal in the livestock sector is a very, it's a big concern for us, because there's a very low attractivity of the livestock sector. Very often young farmers who would like to set up their farms, they are confronted with very high investment costs. As you know, access to credit is one of the main barriers for young farmers to enter the agricultural sector, and very often if you apply for a loan at the bank, you also have to step up your production, which results in an extension of the farm in any case. It's a very labor-intense sector. Animals, they do need daily care. There's a high labor shortage, so a lack of workforce, a lack of farm relief systems. The economic barriers are, of course, very high as well. There's a high price volatility on the market, which depends on the global market as well, of course. Demand and supply, and all of this does result in a very low attractivity of the livestock sector. For the younger generation, mental health is a big issue. The financial constraints, the economic constraints, social perception as well, then the challenges related to environment, they do create a lot of barriers, and I think this should definitely be addressed as well. Now, when it comes to trade and imports, and also exports and dependencies on imports outside of the EU, trade does present various opportunities, of course. The EU is a very big exporter of agri-food products. So we have created in the past years in the EU certain production standards which also bring this value to our products. And I think the question to ask here is, where do we want to go with this additional value we created? And how do we make sure that there is still a value in the future? And for us, this is really about increasing resilience in-house, so on the European market, because in any case, we will be dependent on the global market. There will be shifts in supply and demand all the time. This is how the market works. For example, in the dairy sector, we have seen historical prices in the past 2 years, but of course, prices will go down again. There are the anti-dumping tariffs of China on agricultural dairy products. There has been a lot of more dairy production in the past 2 years because prices have been incredibly high, and now prices will go down again because there is too much supply for the demand. And we will continue to depend on these market dynamics. So what is important for us is to increase resilience on our internal market. So to support the takeover of livestock farms, support young farmers who want to invest. This of course also comes with risk management tools. Climate change, I mentioned before, is a very big concern, a very big challenge. We have seen many animal diseases in the past 2 years. More specifically, there has been a lack of harmonized strategy about how to build resilience in the livestock sector and how to deal with these diseases. Then, of course, when it comes to the sustainable transition, we also have to make sure that in areas where there is a need for a transition, the tools are also there. So for us, this is a lot about responding to the specificities of the territorial challenges we are seeing, and the territorial approach towards livestock is a quite important topic for CIJA. Now, when it comes to the dependencies, mostly on fertilizers and feed, I think that there's a lot to do. There's a lot we can do in the EU. What we are seeing, for example, is in Eastern Europe, many of our young farmers, they report that they rely a lot on chemical fertilizers because there is a huge lack of livestock. So, of course, organic fertilizers, manure, is lacking there. So there's a high dependency, while on the other side of Europe we have a nutrient surplus, as has been mentioned before. So how do we rebalance this? I think there's a lot which can be done with Renew, the use of digestate, bioeconomy, so really invest into the on-farm circularity to decrease the dependencies on inputs which are imported.
Perfect, thank you. You mentioned the territorial approach, so that offers me a perfect transition to that question of spatial distribution of livestock. So we all know that indeed the concentration of livestock perfectly makes sense from an economic point of view, but as Pierre recalled it, it also raises a lot of challenges from a social, employment, and from an environmental point of view. It also means, if you concentrate livestock in some areas in the European Union, that we are lacking livestock in other areas of the agricultural land. So, Reis, to which extent that issue of livestock concentration is something that could be politically tackled? To which extent there is space, a political space, to put on the agenda the issue of a spatial redistribution of livestock within the European Union?
So this is the key question today, I guess, right? So, and thank you for asking to me first. Now this is the difficult one. So I think I can be very brave and say yes, but I think it's very difficult to beat the market. So I think we have to be honest that there are market forces that are difficult to tackle for public policy. But there is, I think, a number of, well, first maybe on the problem analysis. I think there we see the same data, the same trends. So I think that is quite clear. I said already in the previous reply that with our policy proposal, particularly the one that's now on the table of the Council and the Parliament for the period 2028-2034, we have a number of provisions where we require member states, the shall provision, to support extensive livestock. Precisely because we think that it's hugely important to keep livestock in many parts of Europe. Also because of the manure and circularity point, which you very eloquently made previously. So I think it's important to put the public money where it's necessary, and this is precisely on this part of the livestock industry. Also because of its the importance of for example, fighting wildfires, where we need grazing and maintenance of land in some in areas, the importance of maintenance of grassland, also for biodiversity. So there's a huge range of issues that the social issues, the rural vitality question. So we believe that shifting money and putting money on extensive livestock in those areas where this is not happening right now, or where livestock is slowly disappearing. We think that is an important political orientation. And in terms of the generational renewal question, I think that's also important. I mean, this is. I mean, I sit here in a suit in Brussels, right? But it's hard work and it's every day, right? So it's maybe not for some young people not a very attractive business to get into. So I think we also have to think about that, how we can help that. So one of the new tools in the CAP reform proposal is support for farm relief services. In other words, enabling families to deal with, to be able to step out and have somebody else farm for a couple of weeks, for example, during medical situations, or to enable vacation, to make sure that farming remains feasible and attractive. So I think want to mention that. But anyway, I'm circling around your spatial question. I think one of the things that we should not forget is also environmental legislation. So we're talking here about concentration, but concentration that has in many occasions, I think if you would overlap the map of livestock density and livestock concentration that were shown with maps of certain environmental pollution, you would probably have the same map, which means that we also need to make sure that we enforce and implement correctly the environmental legislation in the European Union. This year we'll have a number of implementation dialogues and discussions with stakeholders about that legislation. So it's very important also to engage and to see, is it manageable, is it feasible? But we have these rules and they need to be implemented, and that also, because otherwise you get unfair competition. And I think that is not what we want. We want to make sure that the rules are applied equally, whether it's intensive or extensive livestock farming. The rules in terms of environmental sustainability need to be respected. I think also the job I have at the Commission in terms of sustainability. It means economic, social, and environmental sustainability. We need to have all these things in mind. So that also, I think, is an important aspect to keep in mind for this spatial planning. Maybe the best answer I can give, and then I will stop, knowing that I've circled around it. I think we can't say from Brussels this needs to go here and that needs to go there. But with our strategic plans for the common agricultural policy that we have today, and with the national and regional partnership plans that we will have in the future, we are in fact telling member states to look at the way agriculture works in member states and in the larger member states, particularly in different regions, and to adjust the policy response of the common agricultural policy to the challenges there are. I think what we've seen is we've moved from, price policies to income policies in the common agricultural policy, to decoupled income policies with flat rate payments in many member states. Now we are moving to more targeting. And I think this targeting, and I come back to what I started with this focus on also on extensive livestock areas. That is one of the areas of targeting that we particularly underlined in our proposal, which I think can help with the question of spatial planning that you raised. Thank you.
Thank you. Céline, from what we heard from Reis, there are two things that I would like you to maybe react to. The first thing is that idea of better targeting payments, maybe especially supporting extensive livestock. To which extent, from CIJA's point of view, could you agree on that idea of granting differentiated supports according to each territories or each models of livestock? So that would be my first question. And the second question is, Reis also mentioned the idea of implementing the EU environmental requirements. So in other words, really trying to properly enforce the EU level playing field. To which extent does this also resonate with CIJA's positions toward either a stricter or a looser EU requirement framework?
All right, I will start with the last question. So in CIJA, our approach we have is really to look at toolboxes. So how can we make sure that our members, young farmers from all over Europe, have the tools to implement the legislation? Now, when it comes to environmental legislation, we are working particularly on the Water Framework Directive and the Nitrates Directive, which are, of course, resonating a lot in our membership, particularly in Netherlands, in Flanders, then also in Ireland. And what we were facing throughout the past months was that our members, they do struggle to actually reach the targets which are set, because they feel that, first of all, there is a lack of communication or involvement of farmers and young farmers more specifically when developing, for example, manure action plans. We had this in Flanders, where our young farmers, they reported that there are higher and higher targets set, but the tools to actually reach the objectives, they are not put on the table. So they feel left alone. There's, of course, a lot of pressure, as I mentioned before already, on mental health already, in any case, in livestock sectors. Now, this does not help if you feel that your authorities do not try to consult you when establishing plans. So for us, this is really about the toolbox we can develop to reach the targets. We have looked into technologies for manure management, on-farm nutrient monitoring, so things which do already exist but which are not necessarily put on the table in the member states for the agricultural sector. On the targeted support, it is a tricky question, because we are also still trying to understand exactly how this would work in the new CAP proposal. I think there are a lot of things which would still need to be clarified. At the moment, the top up for young farmers on the basic income support, this is of course something which is very, very well welcomed, and which our members also benefit from quite much. Now, in the new proposal, it is a bit more difficult, I think, because, as I said, there are many questions which still would need to be clarified. On the extensification, I think for us, what is important is really that we look at when it comes to the decline of livestock in certain areas. And I take the example of France because I think it is a very, very good example that, of course, there are regions like the Charolais, the Limousin, etc., where there is a reason why there were specific breeds. And these breeds, they also come with a traditional heritage, they come with a cultural heritage, you could even say a certain food heritage. And for us, granting support to these regions and to these systems, which are mostly extensive livestock systems, because these are permanent grasslands or very hungry soils where you cannot produce anything different, and granting support to these systems to actually maintain them is really important for us, because as I said, it does come with a very, very long tradition, and it is part of the cultural heritage and also of the diversity of European livestock. And in the new CAP proposal, the coupled support, for example, which is mandatory, we do acknowledge this. And then on the new environmental measures for extensive livestock, also on the transition fund towards extensive livestock, I think there are opportunities, but also there would be, we would need further clarification into what criteria, what is the eligibility, etc.
I'm sorry, Taline, because I did not want to trick you into forcing you to deliver these teasers analysis of the CAP proposal, which might not be ready yet, and I could totally understand that the proposal is quite dense. But you perfectly tackled the issue of differentiated incentives according to different territory needs. So thank you for agreeing on answering that question. Isabelle, in your first words, you mentioned the issues of diversity, circularity, which I think very much refer to the question of spatial distribution of livestock. To which extent do you think that we could achieve a better diversity, a better circularity, without modifying the current livestock spatial distribution? And if we had to modify the current spatial distribution of livestock, what kind of challenges do you see in terms of market conditions, under the current market conditions, I would say?
Well, yes, thanks. So first, for addressing the spatial distribution of livestock, what we have to acknowledge is the large complexity of the different livestock farming systems, the very different challenges and the different opportunities that arise from this complexity. So there's, of course, public support that can come in a very targeted way to the different systems, but also there's something that there are many things that can be done at the production level. So mobilizing the already available tools and mobilizing innovation to further insist on better efficiency and achieving a higher diversity within the systems. So in terms of efficiency, of course, we must not consider efficiency at any cost. So always respecting ethical, environmental, and welfare limits. We can mobilize, for example, genetics, breeding for multi-trait efficiency, so considering not only performance, but also functional traits that can support reproduction, longevity, and the welfare, or health and welfare of the animals. Also, we can mobilize knowledge on nutrition with better tailoring of diets to the animal needs so that we reduce the surpluses and minimize the losses. We can use precision livestock feeding. We can insist on the use of novel feeds or the better use of already existing feeds and additives that can contribute to reducing the emissions from animals. Also, we need to apply a One Health, One Welfare approach in order to guarantee that the welfare of the animals will be respected throughout the whole chain, raising, transport, and finally slaughter, if that's the case. And also to reduce the use of antimicrobials, which are resulting in resistances that are also affecting human health. And in terms of circularity, it's also essential that we reconnect the crop, grassland, and livestock production systems, that we make them best possible use of the different resources to which we can have access. We were discussing earlier about the dependencies of the EU on many different external inputs. So, for example, in terms of protein, we have the protein strategy. We can modify animal management and include alternative proteins so that we can reduce this dependency. For example, in the case of imports of soybean or other protein sources, we can improve the use of existing crops that we already have in the European Union, like legume forages or pulses that can be incorporated into the animal diets at a costly effective way, and also contribute to a better efficiency of use of protein within the animal metabolism and a reduction of emissions, and closing all these loops, all these cycles. Also, we can use very different crops and byproducts from the agro-industry. So, for example, we have very good experiences on incorporating byproducts from the wine, the olive, the oil industry, fruit industries, vegetables, and also former feed products that can be very efficiently used by the animals. And in this process, they also produce this manure that can be valorized as direct fertilizer or used for nutrient extraction and even for biogas for energy production. So we can imagine a cascading use in which feeds are first used to feed the animals, then produce the animal products, which are not only food, but also many other products and ecosystem services, and then produce energy. And it's very important to enhance this circularity within our systems. And finally, we were discussing biodiversity. Biodiversity is the key driver of resilience, because it's what drives the adaptive capacity of animals, of farming systems to any challenge. At the animal level, we have breed diversity, but also within breed diversity. At the farm system level, or territory level, wide diversity can help minimize the risk and produce a large array of different ecosystem services. So carbon sequestration in grasslands and manure production in other systems, prevention of risks of erosions or wildfires. And also product diversification is very important at the farm and the territory level, because it supports the resilience of the system, the economic resilience.
Perfect, thank you. Maybe a follow-up question to you, Isabel. If I understood it correctly, as a vice president of the Animal Task Force, your role may be to give some advice to the European Commission as regards livestock. And because the European Commission is preparing this livestock strategy, could you help us to identify maybe one or two concerns that you really would like the livestock strategy to tackle? I do not ask you, maybe if you have some perfect proposals to deliver, feel free to do it, but at least what are for you the one or two core issues, core questions that the future livestock strategy should not miss out?
Well, I wish that I had the silver bullet, but I don't. I think that there are many different issues that have to be tackled simultaneously. So we need to have responsible livestock farming within a circular and resilient agri-food system, because it's just part of the system. We need to tackle emissions, climate mitigation, climate adaptation, welfare, the production of safe and healthy and nutrition animal source food, which is still very important in the diets of large shares of the population, because it delivers high quality protein and essential micronutrients, which are essentials for humans. And also, it's important that we consider that responsible consumption is also part of the system. So the delivery of transparent information to the general public is also going to be very important in designing this. In the Animal Task Force, we are also very concerned that science-based evidence is sometimes not so much considered, and we rely sometimes on narratives that can be a bit biased. So dialogue with all the stakeholders and with support of the academia and engage with society, with public health agents, and also, of course, with policymakers, is essential to put these measures into place. So I wish, as I said, that I had the silver bullet, but that's it.
Good enough, thank you. Céline, we just heard from Isabelle that maybe the livestock strategy should also tackle the issue of responsible consumption. Is that a topic that the CIJA would be keen on discussing? Or do you think that there's a time for everything and now the time is rather for the livestock strategy to focus on the upper range of the food chain, i.e. farms and maybe processors? So to which extent would you like the livestock strategy to be quite a comprehensive strategy going from the production, from the farm to fork, let's say? Or is it better at this political moment to focus rather on the issues concerning farmers, livestock farmers?
I think one goes with the other, hand in hand. As I said previously, the issues of livestock farmers beyond climate change, animal disease, etc., they are very, very strong economic barriers which come with market volatility and below cost selling, low prices, etc. And I think here the value chain approach and rebalancing farmers' position in the value chain is very important. We do not focus on consumer choices because the agricultural sector, we do receive signals from the market, and this is how we apply or how we adapt to these market dynamics. As I said before, this is just demand and supply dynamics which we are adapting to. Now, when it comes to the value chain, what is really important is to address this lack of transparency when it comes to data. So the asymmetry of information across the whole value chain, so about the margins, about how prices are formulated, they of course weaken farmers' position when they negotiate their prices. So this is something which must be addressed. Then also support to farmers' organizations, cooperatives, producer organizations, because they do negotiate directly with the retailers in the end, which of course strengthens the negotiation power of farmers as such. So I think on the one hand, as I said, this value chain approach with rebalancing the position of farmers is quite important to ensure that there's a fairer pricing mechanism, that we are also more resilient towards market volatility which comes from outside of the EU. But on the other hand, and Reis also mentioned it previously, this vulnerability towards fluctuating prices is something which we have to acknowledge, and I also think that this is not something which we can fully resolve, because this is how global markets work. So really the resilience of our own food chain would be the key to focus on.
And Reis, finally, I'm not going to ask you what you would like to put in the livestock strategy. Wouldn't make a lot of sense for the IDDRI, but maybe what would be a realistic achievement from the livestock strategy? Probably in an ideal world, we would see a perfectly competitive and sustainable livestock sector in the EU, but that is probably a little bit of a too high ambition for this livestock strategy. So what do you think would be a great but realistic achievement thanks to the livestock strategy?
I think, can I start with demand? Because in the end, you know, it's to tag on to the question that you just answered. It's all about making sure that the population has the right food, the food that they like to eat, and agriculture is there. We since the 1990s, since 1992, we talk about market orientation, and this was always this concept came from, of course, really the supply needs to be oriented towards the market, but market orientation is really also what do people want to buy, what do they want to eat. So and I think so. I think livestock products, and we've seen some figures on demand trends. Demand trends are there's changes in demand, but it's not overall going down for livestock products, not so much or very little, or well, that's maybe the big debate. But there is a strong demand, and I think it's very important that we have a European livestock sector that is able to meet that demand in a sustainable way, economic, social, environmental. So that is really where I would like to go. So that means also that I think a livestock strategy should contribute to that process. And where are the challenges now? Well, we've discussed some of the challenges. So how can we help this livestock sector adapt and adjust to that demand? And then we're talking indeed about how the supply chain is organized. We talked a lot about production, of course, the farms, but of course there's a strong role also for all the other stages of the supply chain. And as somebody working for DG Agriculture who thinks about the role of the farmer and who sees the enormous income pressure on farmers, I would like farmers to have a much bigger stake and much more power in that supply chain. So I would like to see farmers organize in cooperatives, producer organizations, other forms of collaboration to have a bigger stake, to sell their products, quality products with more value going back to the farm, to have a better a chance of surviving the market economy which we have. So I think that is one aspect I would like to see, and I think we also should think about all the. I talked already about agricultural policy, so let me mention, or the common agricultural policy subsidy system. So let me mention a few other things which I think are valuable. I mean, let me mention, for example, the organic logo and the way in which we see an increasing demand. There is now, of course, some narratives and some data in France that maybe there's less demand for organic, but overall in the EU we see this growing. So there is demand, and this is a way in which you can produce sustainably and sell and have a good economic outcome also as a farmer. So let's use that highly recognized logo that we have in the EU, recognized by over half of the population in the EU. And let's to connect also with the consumer. GIs have not been mentioned yet today. I think also there the EU has in place a very well developed system of geographical indications, connecting also certain production practice and elements of quality directly to the consumer. So how can those systems also help in improving the position of livestock farmers and value the quality that they bring? So there is many. I think I could mention public procurement. I could mention other avenues. The Buy European campaign that President von der Leyen has announced last September, which we are now rolling out as part of our promotion program. So there's many other ways in which we can act. And I think what we try to do with the livestock strategy, to come back to your question, is really to try to put in place to have a holistic approach to how public policy measures can help with reinforcing sustainable livestock in the European agri-food sector. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you very much to all of you to have dared to answer my question. It's now time for your questions from the audience. We can take a couple of questions from the room. And please introduce yourself.
Hi. I don't think this works. Hello. Okay. Yes, my name is Julia Christian. I work for the NGO Fern. I had a question for Isabel, and it's about what you said about how to address the dependency on feed imports. I work for a forest NGO, so hence my interest, of course, because the feed production is mostly soy, which is a lot produced in forest areas in Brazil. You were mentioning that what we need to do is to replace that with proteins grown in Europe. But from my understanding, the reason we use so much imported soy is that imported GMO soy is so much cheaper than anything that we could produce in Europe. And so there's really not the potential for Europe-grown proteins to replace anywhere outside of the non-price sensitive markets like organic and labeled markets, imported GMO soy as feed. So I wonder, do you really see this as a realistic solution to the imported soy problem?
I think it can be part of the solution. Of course, it needs to be cost effective, and in some scenarios, maybe it's not. But it can at least partially replace some of the soy, because, for example, when we are talking about pulses, they do not only supply protein, they also supply energy, so they can also replace some other components of the diet. There are also refined proteins from pulses that can be part of the solution, not directly pulse grains as such. And of course, in diets where the protein demands are really high, it's very difficult to meet these demands with pulses, which have, of course, apart from maybe higher price in comparison to imported soybean, a lower protein content. But in some others which are not so demanding, they can very efficiently replace that. And at least we have examples of that, especially in ruminant diets, in which solutions, including pulses, have been very effective in replacing soybean and cereals in the diets of intensively fed animals.
All right, then. Maybe Lawrence, if you have a question, go ahead.
Thanks. Thank you. Yeah, so, Lawrence Smith, University of Reading and SLU. I had a question. I think it was for Celine, mainly. Really, it was about the sort of farmers' role in society and the perception of farmers' role in society. Because I sort of think back to when I was at school, and I spoke to our careers advisor about what I wanted to do after school, and I wanted to go into farming. I was interested in practical work, and I was actually discouraged from doing that. It was, the option was you can become a doctor or a lawyer, basically, one of the two, or an engineer, maybe. That was the third option, perhaps. So, how do we address this perception of a farmer in society, in terms of livestock farmers or farmers in general, in terms of raising the status or the perceived status of the profession, in terms of attracting new entrants into the sector? Any thoughts?
I think this is a question we have tried to address for the past years. So, no, it is true that, of course, the public perception of farming in general, particularly, of course, with livestock farming, is a rather negative one. At least that's what we feel very often, what we also feel among our members. It has to do a lot, of course, with the environmental challenges agriculture is confronted to, with climate change, etc. But I think there's also a need from our sector to communicate and start to better communicate towards the consumers, but also towards the public in general about what we are doing. About, I think the agriculture sector is very often also perceived as a sector which is not very often up to progress or not taking up with the speed of society, although that is not very true. I mean, there are many technological solutions. We have precision farming tools, digital farming, very like a lot of automatization processes, modernization. So farming nowadays is not the same than it was 50 years ago, of course. And I think we, especially as young farmers, we have a job to do with communicating about this towards the broader public. And in our membership, we have some young farmers who do that. They are farmfluencers. So they try via videos and more information sharing on social media platforms to really give a better perception on what the farming sector is doing at the moment, that we are actually caring about many topics, and we also know that we have to address them. But I agree that in general it is a bit more difficult.
Do we have a question addressed to Reis? I think Eric had his hand raised first.
Thank you. I'm Eric Gall from IFOAM Organics Europe, so I represent the organic sector. And of course, in the organic sector, we are convinced that the livestock sector can play a very important role for the attractivity, the competitivity of our rural areas. It's a huge part of our culture in Europe as well. Of course, you have different methods of productions. Some have a negative impact, some have a tremendous positive impact. But in a system where farmers face global competition, and where the negative externalities are not reflected in the price, it's very clear for us that farmers who engage into sustainability schemes, like organic or others, need a proper support and need fair prices, like some of you said. So this needs to be part of the answer from public policy, but also from the market. And so my question is, isn't it time for even more ambitious demand-side policies? You mentioned transparency. Reis, thank you for mentioning public procurements and the role of quality schemes like organic as well. But when you look at the data, what people buy, I mean, people buy in supermarket, but a big part of the demand comes from the food industry, processors, the catering sector as well. As far as I know, they are the ones buying chicken from Ukraine or Brazil and so on. So are there ways that policy can address this part of the demand for the benefit of our farmers and our countryside?
That's for me. All right. Thanks for the question. I think maybe I like this term commodification that was in the presentation of Pierre-Marie. Yeah? So this whole notion that we are more and more eating standardized bits of meat, processed or other, lots of other bits of the animal are losing value, or we are looking for export markets where maybe those parts are still valued. So so demand is, I think that that's an important aspect to think about when thinking about demand, as well as urbanization. So we are increasingly in urban societies. The way we consume and the way we are, I think, connected to agriculture or life in the countryside is different. So I think we have to keep that in mind when thinking about demand. Your question was, do we need more ambitious? Can we have more ambitious demand-side measures? I think there is political feasibility. I think it's probably not very high. And also there's questions of subsidiarity. In our Vision for Agriculture and Food of last year, we really identified that there was a number of actions that can be taken at the level of member states. And we encourage member states also to do that, while at the same time realizing that there is the need for some coordination and exchange at European level. When I'm thinking about earlier, the point on taxation was mentioned. I doubt that we will see unanimity on taxation at EU level linked to consumption of livestock products, for example. So I think that's really where member states can, within the context of their prerogatives in terms of VAT and so on, can take steps. There is a big debate that we've had over the past years around food environments and how to create better food environments. I think that is also an area where member states, but also regions, cities, villages, I mean, it's really at the local level where that is very important. What I do want to underline is that we do a lot on what we can call demand-side measures at the EU level, food information to consumers, important legislation that is out there. We have our promotion programs, we have the quality schemes, we have a lot of norms around that regulate the internal market. So I think we should not be leaving here with the impression that the European Union doesn't do anything about demand. We do a lot about demand, but moving this forward into coming closer to citizens' decisions, I think there we believe that there is a role for member states and maybe not for the EU now to go further in that direction. Could I jump in on the trade aspects of your question, because I expected some exchange on trade, and I think it's important to mention on the trade side. As you know, the Commission is engaged in making sure that what comes in meets the rules that are in the EU. We have launched impact assessments on that to back up the political orientation with analysis, which ultimately should result also in legislation. But I think it's also important to mention that we are talking here about livestock products, animal products, which have relatively high tariffs. And all the sort of concessions as part of trade agreements are all part of tariff rate quotas, in other words, limited volumes. So we are talking about a sector which is today, and I think will continue to be protected at a relatively high level. And I think that's a good thing, because if you think about, you asked earlier about what should be in the strategy on livestock. Yeah, livestock production for European consumption needs to be in the EU. And yes, we need to trade, so we need to engage with other parts of the world. We need this also for our strategic relations with other parts of the world. We all know about the geopolitical difficulties the globe is facing at the moment, but we need to keep agriculture production in the EU, and we need to have a good and remunerative livestock sector in the EU. And that's why it's important that these sectors continue to be regarded as sensitive sectors also in the trade context. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Isabelle, Céline, and Gijs. We have to stop there for this panel so that we can keep the same amount of time for the second one. I think they deserve a round of applause, if you agree. Thank you very much. Thank you. And so now we will move on towards our next panel. I invite Beate, Ines, and Ziv to join me here. As you wish. No, as you wish. No. So I will start to introduce our second panelist, starting with you, Ines. You are a program leader for farm animal welfare for Eurogroup for Animals here in Brussels. Eurogroup for Animals, in case you don't know about it, is a pan-European animal protection organization representing national civil society organizations at the EU level. Then next to you we have Ziv. You are the Secretary General of EU CBV, the European Livestock and Meat Trades Union, which gathers nearly 50 national and regional federations representing different types of actors, ranging from live animals actors, meat traders, poultry meat importers, and the broader meat industry, including slaughterhouses, cutting plants, and meat processing facilities. And finally, Beate, you are the Secretary General of AVEC, the Association of Poultry Processors and Poultry Trade in the European Union, and you represent members from 17 EU member states, if I'm right. Is there anything you would like to add or modify in your presentation? All fine. Then I might start with you, Beate, I'm not going to be very original because I'll start with the exact same question I asked first to Gijs. Pierre-Marie taught us some important lessons about the current French situation for the French meat sector. We especially have in mind the situation for the poultry sector, where we have a growing gap between our supply and our demand. To which extent does this situation resonate or not with what is happening in other member states in the European Union?
Well, thanks a lot for inviting me. And I really have to say, I've had to congratulate Pierre-Marie and all your colleagues, because this is a really, really fantastic work to show how we need to look at the situation much more holistically than we have seen the debate in the last 10 years. It's been very... one association comes up with, we want more of this, and another comes, we want more of that, and the farmer's sitting back there, okay, but I need to take care of both the environment and the food safety and the animal welfare, and I have to pay my taxes. What should I do? So thank you for that. There's one thing I've missed in debate until now, which was very, very interesting. Thanks for that. And that is Europe is one continent on the planet. There are a few others, and we are going to be more and more people on the planet until at least 2050. And we're going to need 40% more animal protein. In Europe, we are producing animal protein with the lowest emissions in the world. So we could also put up the debate, are we obliged globally to actually produce maybe even more animal protein? And now I said it, Pierre-Marie. That's a question I think we should try to reflect a little bit on. And then, of course, we are in a new geopolitical situation. And I must say, I am ashamed of my generation that we are delivering this kind of planet to our children and grandchildren. We have been morons. Are there anybody here who was born in the 60s? We should be ashamed. But anyway, this is how it is. And geopolitically, we need to face a totally new situation. And food sovereignty in Europe is really very, very important. We are putting much more money into defense right now, and we need to, and that's very, very good. But we are not able to defend ourselves if we don't eat. So food sovereignty in Europe is going to be very, very important. Then I would like to say that livestock in Europe is in a very interesting situation at the moment, because there are, and it's been said already today, societal expectations to livestock for more animal welfare, more environmental protection and so forth. And it would be so very nice if that societal expectation was also shown when people go and buy their food in the supermarkets. But that's not the case. So which incentives do farmers and food producers have to change the systems? Not that many. We heard about our European GIs, and I love the GIs. I mean, the Parma ham, fantastic. It's really, really good. But I'm sorry, it's not going to feed the world. We are not going to. We should keep our GIs, of course, and it's really good, but it's not going to change the big picture. I'm sorry. Then, is the societal expectation actually created by citizens, or is it created by advocacy people? We have a very good example with Ines. She's a very good friend. The NGOs, they are really clever at what they do. They are really, really clever. And they have a lot of influence on the policies made in the EU, which, of course, is a very good thing seen from many perspectives. But sometimes we are getting a little bit too far away from the reality in the markets. Then we have a huge amount of regulation in Europe. Somebody have said that in US they innovate, in China they replicate, in Europe we regulate. Which means that if you get a new good idea in Europe, it takes ages before you're allowed to use it, because we have a lot of regulation put in place to ensure that everything is done in the right way. Of course we need to keep that, but maybe we should ease it a little bit. And for the farmers, what they need to fill out every day of administrative papers and burdens and so forth, you can't even imagine. So there we need to do something as well. And then I think that we from the poultry sector, we are fine, yes, because the demand for poultry meat is growing, even in Europe, and that's really, really good. But we are facing quite some challenges when it comes to imports. And the imports has already been said, from Brazil, from Ukraine. I can tell you that poultry meat is produced under different circumstances than here in Europe. It's in huge farms. I mean, some people call poultry farms in Europe industrial. Then you should go and see how they look in other parts of the world. They are huge. And if we are to produce in Europe, as we do in family farms at the moment, and stay that way with the very high standards that we produce under, and we want to do that, then we need protection, because those huge farms outside Europe are so much more efficient than we are. And the production costs are very... I'm almost finished. So when we are having imports from these countries, then it's very difficult. But, and then I stop, I promise. When we make trade agreements with other parts of the world, we are in competition with German car parts, with defense industry, with blah, blah, blah. So therefore, I'm so happy that IDDRI is here. It's really, really nice, but we ought to have people from almost all the DGs in the European Commission, because this is a very, very complex topic. And there is still much too much silo thinking in Europe. And we need everybody to understand that to rearm, we need to refarm. And that was a good way of stopping me. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you for this comprehensive answer. And don't worry, we will come back to those questions of trade, demand, etc. Ines, I think I owe you a right for response almost after Bitte's words. Pierre-Marie told us that indeed in our French work we haven't been extensively dealing with the animal welfare scenario. We also very often hear from the French meat sector that animal welfare is a nice societal expectations, but we do not see consumers being keen on paying more for that. So how do we keep animal welfare expectations high on the political agenda while remaining on an open market way, while dealing with the current market conditions?
Yeah, thank you. I think maybe the first thing to say is that we have to. We also agree that this project is really good because it brings an holistic view of how we need to think. And I think the first thing that everyone got from the masses is business as usual is not going to cut it for France and for the entire European Union. And I think, looking, I didn't intervene because we now have the chance to do, but looking at the previous panel, it seems still that we are in a mindset that business as usual, let's do small fixes and we'll be okay. This research shows it will not. So this is the first point. And I know it takes a brave step. I know it takes a lot of discussion, a lot of moving people, and it will take a long time. But it starts here from the overarching view from the EU side. And for us, we believe that the European Commission has a duty to provide that guidance and to show people where we're going next. And rightly so, has financed this research to help them do that. On the animal welfare front specifically, we hear a lot that animal welfare is a fluffy topic. That's what I hear. But ultimately, if we think of it as a EU level, the animal welfare legislation shapes the sector. It has shaped the sector when the animal welfare legislation we moved from barren cages to enriched cages for laying hens. It has shaped the sector when we decided to have stronger standards for slaughter and we centralized slaughters, and now we are dealing with the problem, the unintended consequences on the transfer regulation. But it does ultimately help the sector have predictability, know where they're going next, where they have to invest. And in these scenarios, one very important thing is and Paul-Marie really explained that, we have to make a decision what's more important when we are going. And sometimes it's true, regulation can be, complicated or, ask the farmers to spend a lot of time doing it, but it can also be a very good solid indication of where the farmers need to invest next. So this is where we see animal welfare in this bigger picture, and also on the livestock strategy, because it's true that IDDRI doesn't have the animal welfare competency, Sante has, and to the point of Bertha, we need more DGs in the discussion. But ultimately, they can send, between DGs, they can have a strong signal about what the livestock sector needs. And animal welfare needs to be part of it, especially at EU level and especially on legislating. The other point is that we keep talking about, or maybe avoiding the demand side discussion, which is always tricky because, of course, telling people what to do, it's not the style of this new term of the Commission, and we kind of understand where they're coming from, but ultimately we have to. Because also this project showed us that there is no scenario where if the demand side doesn't change, we will not meet the targets that we're supposed to meet. And animal welfare can help with that. We've seen on the communication to the consumers that some information on pack, for example, with eggs, is helping a lot. Not just to inform consumers, but also to help the supply chain organize themselves. For example, now when a supermarket commits to go to cage-free on laying hens is easier because there is a structural legislation behind it, because there is an identification of standards behind it. So it can also help on that. But ultimately, we really need to address, the meat in the room, maybe not the elephant in the room, but the fact that we have to address consumption patterns. And rightly so, Vice mentioned in food environments, which are a bit dead in this term, but it's something that we have to bring back to the table.
Thank you also for this very comprehensive answer. No, it was great. And Ines, you recalled as one of the lessons learned from our project in France, i.e. the fact that the business as usual scenario was not really supported by anybody, neither the meat interbranch organization nor the NGOs. Is that an observation that could be valuable at EU level for your organization as well? Do we need another scenario, no matter which one at this point, than the business as usual scenario, or do you also see opportunities in this scenario?
So the question is for me. Yes, sorry. Okay. Thank you very much. Before I reply to your question, I would like maybe something to introduce myself a little bit more. Is also I'm new at the UCBV. I joined 5 months ago, and I come from after 15 years working for international organization to the global level. So I have also, as my colleague here said, I have a little bit less EU-centric point of view and really a little bit more global point of view, because it's really need to take in consideration that the EU is not an island. It's affected by what's happening around the world from so many levels, from geopolitical issues, from trade issues, etc., etc. And this need to adapt also to the different situation, which is not only about the EU. Coming to your question is that, of course, the current situation is not sustainable for the future. Of course, the industry and the sectors are suffering because of different issues, market demand, geopoliticals, competitions, a lot of regulations that put a lot of pressure on them, that in the end of the day, they need to bear the cost of them, and they are not sufficiently supported. So EU always said, we are the best, we have the best standards and everything, but it's easy when others are bearing the cost of it. So we need to find, of course, different way of doing things, allow to the producers to produce according in good conditions. You cannot only ask and ask and ask. In one point, you will put them outside of the business. And if we look at the scenarios, and one of the things I like Pierre-Marie doing is also to show evolution of things. We didn't come here one day out of the blue. Evolutions. Things came step by step, meeting different conditions, meeting different market pressures to a point where we are today. Now, we understand right now this is not the right place. So then the Commission has a very important role now to change it for us in the future. And it should actually look into the different scenarios, but it doesn't mean that each one of them or one individually can work. It actually cannot work. This is what was said by Pierre-Marie. What we need to see is the big picture, how we are balancing the different scenarios in a way that are meeting the requirements. So we are meeting the EU targets on climate, on environment, on animal welfare, which is important. At the same time, allow to the producers the best conditions to continue to produce, as mentioned by a colleague from farmers. It's not anymore attractive to young generation to go in this direction. And this is something we will face in the future. But also concentration of work, of production. It's not only concentration of production of livestock. It's concentration of industry, it's concentration of people in big cities. Most of the people living in big cities, there is a concentration there. Because of evolution brought us to this situation. So if we want to think for the future how we resolve it, we need to look into the big picture. Focusing on small part of the puzzle, one of them will be good for one aspect, or will create consequences to the other aspect of it.
Birte, you dared raising an hypothesis of maybe the European Union should produce more livestock products in order to supply growing demand at global level. Let's consider that option. You also mentioned the fact that we have to face growing geopolitical uncertainties, and you are very much aware of the fact that in order to produce more livestock products in the EU, we would need more feed, soybeans, or cereals, which requires more nitrogen. Those two things are things for which the EU highly depend upon third countries. How do you consider the likelihood in the uncertainty, the geopolitical uncertainties that we are facing? How do you consider the likelihood that the EU would remain in a position good enough to keep importing more and more soybean and nitrogen if we really wanted to increase our livestock production?
That's what I would call a really good question. We need to focus much more on the EU protein plan for feed. And there we from AVEC, we have, many of you in here will know that we have been a little bit against more import of poultry meat from Ukraine, and we are a little bit afraid of the competition that we get from Ukraine because they are really efficient in how they produce poultry. But we have said, okay, Ukraine is going to be a member of the EU, hopefully, because that will mean that the Ukrainians didn't lose the war, and we don't want them to lose the war, for goodness sake. But maybe when they become a member of the EU, there would be a really fantastic opportunity to have protein production in Ukraine. They already produce a lot of sunflower, and maybe there was a possibility of some soy production there as well. That could be one thing, but also there should be even more. There's already lots of research and development within how to use proteins from grass, from other things, and I really find that we need still to use a lot of research funding for purposes like that, because we need to become self-sufficient in protein for our animals in Europe, definitely.
Thank you. Another important issue that Beate raised at the beginning was the issue of the demand, but even within the European Union, and from what I understood, your two organizations are used to discuss. Are there any measures that your group for animals has already been discussing with representatives from the private sectors, such as our two guests here, that could be a compromise on, okay, there are certain things that we all agree on to tackle the issue of the demand, or making the demand within the European market evolve, either from a qualitative or from a quantitative point of view. What I mean is that I think you said it, we know in which direction your group for animals would like to go, but have you already identified ideas, policy proposals that could find a deal with representatives of the private sector in order to tackle that very sensitive issue of making the demand evolve?
Yeah, I think maybe just a quick point. On the demand, actually, when I hear Beate saying, we can use the production force of Ukraine to raise soy, to feed animals, then feed us. My business mind immediately goes like, why are we not eating directly those plants? Like, why are we putting a middle intervention? So, and here is where the demand side is very important, because of course, at the moment, and food environments is key to this. At the moment, and I totally understand the point between being a citizen and a consumer. As a consumer, we are exposed to a certain food environment that takes us to buy certain things. And here we're discussing about animal products, but we also know we have a massive problem in society in eating stuff that we shouldn't be eating, from sugar to salt to a lot of other nasty things. So there is an inherent problem there, and we need to solve this demand side thing, because I also, from the farmer's perspective, is really unfair that the Commission comes and say, here is a livestock strategy, do all these things, but we are not addressing the market that is going to absorb those products, okay? Just, solve it out for you, and then create this amazing new product that is more sustainable, blah, blah, blah. But then we are not looking at how the market can absorb that product. So it's really, I understand that it's a tricky situation and thing to discuss, but it's essential, because ultimately, and to your point on the partnerships, what we've seen on animal welfare specifically is that it works to place higher animal welfare products in the market with a price difference if it's done in a very good integrated supply chain way. Because if we get, a farmer to produce something a bit higher, and then we put it on the shelf next to 1,000 other things that are cheaper, probably not as well identified, and so on, of course, the nowadays consumer exposed to that environment is going to go for the easiest, cheapest solution, the one that they are more familiar with, especially if they don't understand why is this product a bit more expensive. But if you do it in a good, integrated action, let's use, there are several examples, but let's use the Dutch example on poultry. They've decided together as stakeholders from civil society meaning not just animal welfare front, but also environmental fronts, private sector, meaning farmers and retailers and the processes in between, that they were going to go in a certain direction. And that decision made all the difference because they did it together. And it was incremental, it was predictable, and now the government has embraced that and has said, okay, here's a stretch until 2040, but we are going to have a standard for chicken that is higher. And then they did a lot of promotion towards consumers. They have a strong label as well that consumers trust. They've worked with all this holistic view of increasing impact, how can we reduce the environmental impact of having less animals, also through the supply chain as well, because sometimes we have a very one-sided analysis of what sustainability looks like, and then we go like, and we have these discussions with different organizations from the animal production side. Oh, you're asking us to reduce the number of animals in a farm, so the environmental impact is going to go crazy and increase. But the truth is, for example, looking at the Netherlands, that yes, they reduce the number of animals per space, but then the animal is more resilient, so less mortality, less use of antibiotics. The processing side is much easier and quicker. The supermarkets helped to look at different recipe changes, so we don't always use, to the point of ice, the breast of the animal, which is now what the consumers want. Why do we need to put that on a pizza? We don't. We can use, actually, there are better parts of the animal to use there. And ultimately, communicating to the consumers, yeah, this is going to cost you a bit more, but this for a good reason. And ultimately, in your final budget, it's probably not going to be that hard. So, yeah.
To be honest, I saw Zeev's head nodding a little bit. I also saw Beate wanted to react. So maybe if the two of you want to react quickly to what Ines just said, please go ahead. Beate, if you want to go first.
Yes, thank you. I follow you very, very far, Ines, and one of the things that I really would encourage your organization and other NGOs to is to maybe communicate a bit more to the consumers, because it was already stated that the number of farms have gone down tremendously. I come from Denmark, one of the very dark green parts on the map. And when I was a child, there was lots and lots of farms in Denmark. There are not that many now, which means that very few people know what's going on out there. And have the farmers been good at communicating how they have industrialized farming? No, they haven't. They have stayed silent because every time they put their nose forward, then they had a really big punch on it. So the people in the cities, they really lack knowledge about how their food is produced. And farmers and the food producers, they would be happy to produce things in a different way if it's a higher standard, if they were sure they could sell it. So if we could educate, and I know this sounds horrible, but if we really could educate the consumers in how their food is produced, then maybe, I'm not sure, but maybe they would say, okay, then I want to prioritize a little bit differently and use more money on my food and maybe not buy the newest version of the iPhone the day it comes out. You understand what I mean? We need the change of narrative, and that also, if I may, goes into the thing about the generational renewal, because the normal EU citizen or the normal EU consumer, I would say, at least where I come from, the first thing people think about when I say farmer is polluter, where I come from in Denmark. That narrative needs to be changed. They should see a fantastic young farmer, as we have here from Sedja, as a hero, because they are actually the ones producing our food. And if the consumers are willing to pay more, and that we have the protection, so we are not importing it from parts of the world where they are not having these considerations, then we would have a better picture. So actually, I said before that we should have more DGs in the discussion. We should also have anthropologists. Is that the right pronunciation in English? Yeah? Because how are people reacting? And people are, the consumers are not doing this because they're stupid. They are doing it because they don't have the knowledge, maybe, that they would need to go and prioritize differently. And affordability is still also something that we need to take into account, because here in Brussels, the Brussels bubble, we can sit and agree that GIs are really good and we can pay for organic, and organic chicken is 4 times as expensive as a conventionally produced, and all of us here can afford it, I guess, but I know a lot of people who can't. So that's also a thing we need to take into the equation. But we need more knowledge about how our food is produced.
Thank you very much. It's okay. Birte took a lot of argument that I want to raise. Birte, next time, leave me something. No, but I think she touched very important issue, education. And as I said before, evolution of things, more people concentrate in big cities. They go to the supermarket. They don't know the hard work there is behind the meat they just pay. They just choose. They look probably in most cases, as mentioned, affordability. I can afford myself this piece of meat or this piece of meat. It will go probably for the one they can afford themselves. So in the end of the day, we need to go for educating them where this is coming from, what is the work behind this. There is so many people, millions of people working in a very difficult situation, not like here us, very comfortable, in order to produce the food that probably in half an hour we are going to eat, and we are not thinking about it even. We just take it for granted, it's food, I can eat it, that's it. They don't think where it's coming from. If they will be educated, if they understand where it's coming from, they will then probably make better choices. I teach my daughters, when they have meat on the table, I tell them where the meat is coming from. So in the end of the day, they don't throw it away. They will eat it because they understand and appreciate this piece of meat that was produced, first of all, use an animal to produce it, and a lot of work by so many people to put it on your table. So education is extremely important, need to be taken in consideration, and affordability. And we cannot detect to our consumers what to eat or not to eat as long as we give it's on the market. They will choose for themselves. We are in democracy where people make their own decision. The decision needs to be done as best on their knowledge, information, and education. Then they can choose for themselves. The way I eat today, it's much different the way I eat 10 years ago, because I'm educated myself or educated through my work and everything, and now I can make better decision. If I can afford all the decision or all the things that I would like to, not always. So it's something to take in consideration. And one point that I would like to go that I maybe didn't mention before related to the future strategy is that it's nice to have scenarios and it's nice to have strategy, but we need to have an aim, a goal. What is the goal in front of us? We spoke before 2035. I usually speak about 2040. The goal that EU people, Commission, need to ask themselves, what we want in 240 or 235 or whatever in the future. We want food made in EU or food made in elsewhere. If we want food made in elsewhere, go ahead with the current situation. We are on the good track together. If we want food made in EU, we need to ensure that we are doing it and help the producers to produce food made in the EU, and the citizens/consumers appreciate it, and we promote it, and they will choose it.
A follow-up question to you. I understand that you tell us we cannot add and add and add constraints on EU farmers if we want them to survive on the market. I agree on that. But on the other hand, we have to keep in mind that the majority of the trade from the livestock sector, at least in France, is made within the common market. And for that, in order for the French livestock sector to survive on the common market, we need a level playing field. We need to ensure the fact that what is happening in France is somehow the same or relates to the same production conditions that we have in other member states. So how to find a balance between the right level of communality at EU level to ensure the level playing field and what you say, the need to not put on farmers' shoulders too many constraints.
If your way is to achieve your goals through the farmer, you need to put them in a situation that they are in condition to produce what you want. So you need to support them. You need to give them the means in order to deliver what you want, like to have. If you just put on them a lot of requests, a lot of standards, and you don't help them to do so, you will put them out of the business. You can look in the last 20 years. 20, I don't remember exactly the date, 2003 or 2004, the hygiene regulation entered into force, required from a lot of operators in my sectors to adjust to the new standards. Many of them, the small one and the medium one, were not able to meet this, to invest and meet these requirements. So they went out of the business. Then the business will shift to more big corporation or big slaughterhouses or the one who could afford themselves. Then they improve the standards and they improve the quality and the food safety of the product. But the small one could not invest in this, were put in the... So if you help them to invest and to meet the requirements, then you can also have them continue to produce.
I was going to give you the floor, Ines, and maybe related to that, feel free to react, but you can also go further on what you would like to see on the livestock strategy. Could an increased support to small farmers or small livestock farmers be a compromise with your neighbor over here, or do you have any other ideas?
So I think also one point for us on the animal welfare front is the fragmentation of the EU landscape is massive. We did an analysis and it's, I think, 437 different animal welfare legislations across the EU in the different member states. And this creates a massive fragmentation of the landscape, to your point of the single market and common market. So for us, we do see that there is a need for level playing field also on animal welfare. We have a massive opportunity now, and this is something that I think we strongly support, that the strategy for livestock says that is also essential for the farmers to have this level playing field, to have this predictability, to know exactly what's coming for them in terms of their production systems. And that should be done in an harmonized way, in our perspective. Having said that, we also understand that, for example, some member states are already ahead on certain standards, also like a bit that differentiation. And also for small and medium farmers, that's very key, because it's niche to them to be a bit better, hopefully, because that's what differentiates them on the market as it exists at the moment. So what we've seen is very good examples of where there were member states, let's use Finland as an example, that has set a certain minimum standard, in our case on animal welfare, and then used public funding to help farmers to get to that minimum standard and also accelerate it and get it even better if they wish to. So they've set a minimum standard for pigs, for example, where there was less confinement. And then they set financing mechanisms through the Common Agriculture Policy, where they said, you know, here is a bit to help you get to this minimum standard, but also get a bit more if you want to go already higher and differentiate yourself in the market. And this can help a lot, especially small and medium farmers. But to the point we were discussing on the previous panel on the Common Agriculture Policy, this now will lie even more on the member states to decide to do that. So it's very important that, if nothing else, there are strong recommendations, strong strategies from the Commission, so the member states know where are we going next, and a lot of inter-DG discussions, because again, for example, in our case, DG Sant has the competency and DG Agri has the money. So, yeah.
Thank you very much to the three of you. We now have a bit of time to take some questions from the audience. I see the hand here in the background.
It works? Okay, good. Thanks. Thank you very much for the presentations and the discussion. My name is Marilda Descali. I work for BirdLife, Europe and Central Asia. I have one question and just two small comments regarding the production and the fact that there are a lot of small farmers and medium farmers disappearing in Europe. You're right, but the production, it's not going down. The production is the same. It actually has increased. So this means that we have switched from medium mixed farms to more and more specialized and industrialized farms, especially in the livestock. And I think that as Pierre-Marie was showing, this optimization of production, to say increase intensification of production, has externalities that today are extremely difficult to cope with. Taking Denmark, the tripartite agreement came because the nitrate pollution in the Baltic Sea and in even the watershed in Denmark was unsustainable. There are places where the drinkable water, there is no more drinkable water, and the pollution from the nitrates, it's so costly. It costs between 70 to 300 billion euros per year. These externalities are not taken into account, and we cannot say that the system we're in is efficient. It's not, actually. It's unsustainable. And thank you, Pierre-Marie, for showing us different paths. And I want to go back to those different paths. When we saw the vision, we saw different scenarios. And there are scenarios that present better trades-off, right? And thank you for bringing that, I forgot your name, I'm sorry, for looking at the big picture, the vision, right? Where do we want to go in 2040? And I think the question is not, do we want to eat European or do we want to eat elsewhere? This is just completely overlooking the big crisis that we are face of us. It's, do we want food? Do we want to maintain the capacity to produce food in the future? Because right now, there is the climate change, that is extremely disrupting our food production. There is biodiversity loss that is also something that will disrupt the food production. There is the food security issue. And we are not tackling that by just deciding if we want to eat European or elsewhere. So taking that, the scenarios, the best trade-off scenarios that was presented, how can the livestock sector, what would need the livestock sector in terms of investments, in terms of redirecting skills of farmers, you know, because we cannot extensify everything. Pork, poultry cannot be extensified. How are we going to deal, and what are the the policy recommendations you would put in place in order to reach that scenario? I think that this is the question, is how we are going to transform the sector, and not to maintain it as it is right now. Thank you.
I'm not really sure which scenario you were pointing to, but feed no food. Okay. It is true. Being a Dane, we have the tri-party agreement in Denmark, and I was at a conference in Poland where I was asked, why did the Danish farmers go into that? And I told the Polish audience that that's because the Danish farmers, they love to pay taxes, which is not true. No, they came into that because the whole of the Danish parliament, from left to right, wanted something to happen. And there you can also say, okay, this that we have consolidated so much in Denmark, that there are so few farmers left, also means that they have much less political empowerment, because there are not many voters in farming anymore in Denmark. But that's another story. But they went to the table, and you're right. It's not okay. Something needs to be done, and it's being done now in Denmark in this way. Is that the way to go everywhere? I don't think it is. But you're right. We need to do something about the climate. Definitely. So the way that we've been going in Denmark and the Netherlands, they are examples of when you go really big. But you need, if you want to produce food for all the citizens in the world, you need to industrialize farming. We are not going to produce food for all people in the world in Europe, but you need to industrialize in order to produce more. Otherwise, we are not able to feed the world. I'm sorry, but that's. I know that we are not agreeing on that.
When you regulate demand, actually,
When you regulate the demand, yes, but we're going to be more people in the world. You know, there is evidence that we're going to need 40% more animal protein until 2050. I'm really sorry. That's evidence. But anyway, we are not going to produce all of that in Europe. I agree, but we need to face the reality while we are still looking at how we can reduce the impact on the environment. And actually, I know this is very, very hard to believe, but again, here in Europe, we are the place in the world where we have investigated and researched the most in this. So we are actually the place in the world where we are able to produce the most with the least. And we should continue that route. We should continue innovation and finding solutions on how to produce high quality food for people with the lowest impact on the environment. We definitely need to go down that route, and we are already there, but right now we have ended up in a situation where we are putting restraints on when there is new innovation, then sometimes it's not allowed to go into production because we need to it has to go through so many procedures first to be acknowledged, and maybe that's a thing that we need to look at. I don't know if it's a very sufficient answer.
Yeah,
but
Ziva, are there any things you would like to bring in?
I would
that
be short on
conversation
this.
as well?
You touch on the point of food security. So as long Europe, we don't have disasters, wars that really put us in a situation we don't have access to food, majority of Europeans are still able to access food. The question is if they access or resource the food from EU producers or from outside of the EU. This was the point I mentioned. I try. Food security, for me, coming back again from the international level, working on food security in different regions around the world, which areas where not have no access to food, to animal protein, for weeks and months. This is, from my point of view, food security. When I come to Europe and start to hear food security, it's because we put on ourselves such a high standards where our producers are not able to meet them, so we have difficulties to produce to the level that we need to. This is not the same, from my point of view, as have the access to food or not. European, in most cases, there are vulnerable communities in Europe. In most cases, will be able to access food. The question, which kind of food?
Thank you. We have time just for one last question, brief and, if possible, addressed to Ines. Nikolai?
Thank you for the discussion, and also congrats for the work. I'm not sure if it's going to be specifically focused to Ines, but Nikolai working at Agora Agriculture, which is a think tank based in Berlin, also in Brussels. And some time ago, we produced a scenario for food, agriculture, and forestry in the EU by 2050. And when it comes to livestock, so our vision really, and policy options related to that, really balance and combine, in a way, this kind of climate efficiency on the one hand, high animal welfare on the other, and also maintaining permanent grasslands, which was mentioned in the previous discussion. So all this kind of payments for the public goods that these grasslands produce are really important. Now, when we come to this industrial cluster part of the discussion, my question is whether you see, and reflecting in a way what Pierre-Marie had on one of the slides, kind of questioning, in a way, where's the societal acceptance and willingness to invest into intensive systems? And my question is then, well, what if you kind of take an approach which really emphasizes the investment in the animal welfare standards and in the climate effectiveness? Often it's seen as a sort of a burden, but is this not maybe a big chance for the sector going forward and into the future?
And then I'll let Bertha and Ziv reply. But I think exactly that's the key point, and also connects with the generation renewal, the certification. Ultimately, no one is going to want to work in an industrialized environment because it will not compensate as much, because we're trying to reduce costs and the environment is not good. It is. So just keep leaving that point, because we of course we can decide, oh, let's move as this industry here, let's put those animals there, but ultimately we need humans to operate this, and it's not going to work. We see it certification. We also see the organizations from workers' rights saying intensification is really hurting the rights of our workers, the demand to produce more in a centralized way and just getting more animals through a line, for example, in the slaughterhouse is really problematic. And we've seen also when animal welfare is decreased, but especially if there are certain animal elements like natural light, outdoor access and so on, it really increases the well-being also of the people working there. And it makes it more attractive, of course, than working in a place with no natural light, with a lot of animals and a lot of stress, because there's mental health is very connected to that as well. So just leaving that point.
Beata and Ziv, please keep it very short.
Very short. Very difficult. The very short answer to your question is yes, if we get a much larger understanding of how food is produced. Because there is no market at the moment. We have tried it in the poultry sector in many different countries where people, where the companies, have tried to brand with higher animal welfare, and they simply weren't able to sell their products. In France, we have seen after COVID and the Ukraine war and the inflation that La Belle Rouge sale went really much down, because people are still thinking with their wallet when they go out and buy. And then I'll stop. Eurobarometer, the last one made on food safety. One of the key questions they are putting out is they interview lots of people around the EU, as you know, I'm sure. What is the most important for you when you buy your food? And it is cost. And ethical concerns comes on the last and 7th place. Climate concerns comes on the 6th. And it's not because the consumers are stupid, it's because they don't know enough. So if we can get that turned around, then there is an opportunity in Europe. But in the rest of the world, I'm not so sure.
And last remark, maybe not on affordability, but social acceptance of things. As long as you don't have a valid alternative that really the people will demand for it, the consumers, it will not go ahead. You cannot put on them this. And I give 2 examples from the last decade. There was tentative to come with an alternative like the insect protein or with lab meat. They are not working, and because it exists, the technology, it can be produced. The point is that the consumer is not interested in this. So in the end of the day, it will probably, by demand, that will shift the market.
Just to say that ultimately we're saying that demand is so important, it's going to shape the market and the strategy is not going to touch it. So just saying that.
How do you know that?
Well, because you just said there's no appetite. It's highly unlikely that politically we can do anything about the demand side, right? So.
I disagree with that interpretation, but maybe that's for the coffee or the lunch.
Yes. Please give our speakers a round of applause. Thank you very much. And thank you for having kept with us during the entire time. We now give the floor for final words to Lawrence.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm very conscious that I'm all that stands between you and your lunch, so I'll try and be as brief as possible. But yeah, my name is Lawrence Smith. I'm the coordinator of this amazing piece of work called Pathways. And just to say that all of the brilliant work has been done by other people, so I'm just the organizer. So congratulations to all of the researchers and the partners in the project. To try and sort of wrap up based on what I've heard today from the panel discussions and presentations, I think for me it really stood out that there's huge value in looking at future scenarios for the development of livestock in Europe and globally. But no one scenario is going to tick all of the boxes. So there's no silver bullet, as someone mentioned earlier. So I think when we're thinking about the future development of livestock systems, we're really going to have to take a piecemeal approach where we choose the best of a number of scenarios rather than saying this is the one approach that we need to follow. The other thing that came across from the discussion for me was the importance of thinking about the food system, and in particular the role of citizens and consumers in sustainable livestock systems, and how we communicate the role of livestock in society more effectively to these end consumers and representatives of society. And it was very interesting for me to hear the point made about the importance of including anthropologists and social scientists and even artists in this development of ideas around how we communicate results from research effectively to society at large. And lastly, I think it came across to me that there's a key role for policy in terms of income support for the livestock sector and making sure that we're also supporting the lifestyles effectively to make livestock farming and farming in general, in fact, an attractive profession. So with that in mind, I'm just going to sort of give a short advert about some of the next steps for the Pathways work that are coming. And just to say, in the project life, we've been working across these 4 objectives that you can see represented here in terms of developing improved methods for sustainability assessment, evaluating innovations across practice hubs and living labs of livestock in Europe, and through the work that Pierre-Marie and colleagues have been leading, developing scenarios and assessing those to identify transition pathways. So I'm not going to go through this image, but suffice to say we're coming towards the end of the project now, so it's hugely satisfying to see these results coming forward, and great to hear that it's informing the development of the sustainable livestock strategy. So in terms of next steps, we're trying to share results effectively, and I'm going to give a few highlights in the sort of 5 minutes that remain. For me, one of the key highlights of the project is, beyond the scenario development and assessments, has been the characterisation that we've done of livestock in Europe. So this is a really useful resource for other research and development projects that's built on existing data sets such as the FADN and expert knowledge, and it's providing a robust baseline to allow us to assess the future of livestock in these different scenarios, as well as thinking about how those farm structures and practices may change within this comprehensive data set. So this information is publicly available now on the Pathways website through a deliverable, and as I say, it's already informing work in related projects, so it's a really useful resource for researchers and others to think about the future of livestock. We've also been working at a macroeconomic modelling level with Magnet, the model developed in Wageningen in the Netherlands, to think about the international dimension beyond Europe with regard to the scenarios encompassing animal welfare, efficiency first, and so on. And as you can see here, with a snapshot of the results, there's no one scenario that is green across the board. So there's key trade-offs here, in particular for greenhouse gas emissions, where we see some perhaps counterintuitive results, with an efficiency first scenario driving an expansion and an increase in greenhouse gas emissions in Europe through that production efficiency and reductions elsewhere, with the animal welfare scenario perhaps suggesting the most balanced portfolio across these impact categories. This is just a taster, and there'll be more detailed information about these results coming in the next weeks. Similarly, we've been doing extensive work with life cycle analysis, or LCA, and working with the scenarios, as you might expect. With the efficiency first narrative, we found lower impacts per kilogram of product, but interestingly, within this assessment, we found higher resource use, in particular through high levels of purchased inputs and fossil fuel use embedded within the LCA. and per hectare of product, we tend to see the lower impacts associated with the feed no food scenario, but higher impacts per kilogram of product and higher animal welfare. We're seeing greater impacts due to lower yields per kilo, but similar impacts for some systems compared to the baseline. We've also been looking at a regional level with nitrogen stocks and flows at a NUTS 2 and NUTS 3 region as well in some areas. And this is allowing us to see how livestock can promote a circular bioeconomy. And one of the things this work has done is highlighted the value of grass-based systems in addressing the end surpluses that we see in particular in parts of Northern Europe. So moving to this feed no food has reduced the end balances at this regional level when we've looked at this scenario evaluation. And as I say, more detailed results on this will be presented. And so it now falls on us as a coordination team to bring the results together, and we'll be working with a holistic framework that we've developed in Pathways through a participatory approach that builds on the 3 pillars of sustainability plus an animal welfare pillar, and brings in this dimension of leverage points and thinking about how we can affect change in food systems and not just address the sustainability aspect, but also the human aspect that was referred to earlier in terms of behaviour. So that's an exciting piece of work that will be taking place over the next months. And we're also ensuring a project impact legacy, mainly through the resources that we're making available through our website. If you haven't already, do check out our Pathways website, where you'll see an online policy toolkit that's bringing together the resources that have been developed over the last 4 years. And it's a really user-friendly environment for accessing these deliverables and outputs. We're also publishing or have published decision support tools such as the Food Basket app developed by the team in France, which is allowing consumers and citizens to see how their weekly diets affect greenhouse gas emissions, but also their nutrition in terms of looking at these trade-offs and the impacts of their choices. So in summary, we're providing this robust and user-friendly approach to looking at trade-offs and identifying win-wins for policy and practice. And the results from scenario evaluations and from these innovative farmers are providing key input to this process and helping us to identify a context-specific evaluation of livestock. So we'll be updating the policy toolkit and the website over the coming months as these results are coming in thick and fast. And the easiest way to keep track of updates is to sign up for our newsletter. And so you can do that again through the website, but do check out the policy toolkit and the resources, the videos, and other materials there, such as the deliverables, which are public. I also want to say there's a forum coming up on the 13th of May. So this is a date for your diaries. You're all invited. Please do come along to hear more about these results. We're planning to have a poster session as well, so you can discuss one-to-one with the research teams about their results in detail. So do come along to the Residence Palace in Brussels on the 13th of May. And last but not least, I want to say a fond farewell to Harry Blockhuis, who was an inspiration and key to the development of Pathways. And Harry was a professor of ethology at SLU, and he passed away very recently last weekend. Some of you will have met Harry and known him in person through the development of Pathways over 4.5 years ago now, and we're very sad to report this loss. But Harry was a great friend as well as being a brilliant colleague, and Pathways would not exist without him. So we opt for our condolences to his friends and family in this sad time. And so with that, I'd just like to say thank you to everybody for today. In particular, thanks to the panel representatives and to the speakers, in particular to the team at Revolve, who you've seen in these fetching orange t-shirts. I think we're one of the only projects I've been involved with our own clothing line. So if you would like one, please contact me or Revolve. And the IDDRI team as well for a fantastic event. It was a really inspiring discussion. And I'd like to thank the organisers of the venue as well in terms of the catering and for supplying this excellent space to us today. And thank you to all of you for engaging so thoughtfully.